Welcome to I Am 5/5. I'm your co-host, Ahmad Mansour.
And I'm your other co-host, Bill Thomason.
What's going on, brother?
You feel more? What's up, man?
I'm doing well, Dollar Bill. I'm doing well. So today, man, we have someone who is a good friend and someone who really shares a lot of our interests, Dollar Bill, and that is around Black men, the future of Black men, and the world of opportunities that are available to Black men. Now, Michael Taylor, Coach Michael Taylor, is a coach, and he is someone who calls himself, the ultimate optimist. And I may have said that incorrectly, Michael. You can clear it up.
The irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible.
There you go. So I do not need to repeat that because he says it's better than me. He says it with more energy and something that will stick more with you than how I could say it. So I just want to say welcome to 5/5, Michael. I am 5/5.
It is my absolute pleasure and honor to be on the show with you guys. Looking forward to a powerful conversation.
So Michael, you've been in this business for about 20 years, really speaking, writing, and having these really great conversations with men about men. And more particularly for us, because we're I Am 5/5, even about Black men. Actually, your last book was called Shattering Black Male Stereotypes. Now, you've had a couple of books out since then, but today we want to talk a little bit more about your recent book, which is A Conversation with Men, and perhaps we can kind of tie in Shattering the Black Myths also. So I'm really excited about today, man.
Yeah, and again, it all ties together because my focus is on the changing roles of manhood and masculinity in society. And obviously that includes Black men. Now, I believe there's been a lack of exposure of Black men who are having these types of conversations. And that's why I launched the Shatter the Stereotypes movement, because I want to bring Black men into the conversation. And again, having you on my show, Ahmad, and just, us engaging in that conversation has really, it's given me hope that yes, we as Black men are willing to engage in these types of conversations, and it fills me with optimism. So I'm excited to be here.
So let me ask you, so what have you learned from that? Because I think you've done that for more than a couple of years now. So you've interviewed a lot of people, you've spoken on this. What have you kind of gleaned from all of these conversations that you've had?
Well, first and foremost, I see, or what I've experienced is Black men are a lot more optimistic than people think they are. Black men are not.
Explain optimism though for me, Michael, because that can mean a lot of different things.
For me, optimism is a sense that things are going to get better. Okay. A sense that despite the challenges that are out there, there's reasons for me to feel hope, inspiration, motivation, and know that I have the capacity to have anything I set my mind to. So to me, optimism is simply, it's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of seeing it in a positive light.
Okay, all right.
So in those conversations, you talk about how Black men are more optimistic. What was kind of the thesis that you started off with to even bring this into a conversation?
Every interview I've done, and I've done well over 100 of these, and every time I interview a Black man, one question that I always ask them is, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future in general? 95% of the time, it's optimistic. That's where I got that idea from.
So what do you think generates this negative stereotype that Black men aren't optimistic? Because I think in the conversations that we've had, and some of that have centered around media perceptions of us, and perhaps even how and I think what you've learned, and maybe this was kind of shattered in the process, this whole idea that how people think that we've internalized kind of a pessimistic, fatalistic view of the world. But it sounds like that there's something that you learned that said that it's the opposite of that. But there was something that obviously had driven you to think that that Black men had a pessimistic view of the world?
Well, let me just say this first and foremost. I am, as I mentioned earlier, an irrepressible optimist. That is the lens through which I see the world. That's how I see the world. Now, I get a lot of pushback at times from Black folk because of my optimism. I'm accused of denying the challenges that we have. I'm accused of being out of touch with my Blackness because I'm so optimistic. Well, again, that's the lens through which I see the world. Now, as I've interviewed these men over the last 20 years, there's a common theme. We recognize the challenges. We know that the media is going to portray us in a negative light and push this negative narrative about us. But at the same time, if you look at how many Black men that are now engaging in ways that we as Black men can come together to transform our communities, I don't see how you can't be optimistic, because I see so many organizations right now that just 5 years ago didn't even exist. I mean, there's the Black Man Can Institute. There's the Ever Forward Club. I mean, there's so many, the 100 Black Men. There's so many Black organizations that you don't see in mainstream media, but Black men are doing remarkable things. And that's why I started the podcast, because Shattering Stereotypes highlights all the positive things that we're doing.
Let's talk about some of those stereotypes. Run off a few, because I think that's something Ahmad and I talk about a lot, man, is the imagery of Black men and stereotypes that we have.
Well, first of all, did you guys have the chance to see the documentary that was just featured on Discovery Plus called Profiled the Black Man? Did you guys get a chance to see that?
Man, I missed that one.
Oh, dude, it's on Discovery Plus.
Okay.
It was put together by Tina Knowles, Beyonce's mom.
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah.
And so it was a 4-episode documentary. And interestingly enough, the 4 episodes were actually 4 of the stereotypes that I talk about in my book. In my book, I share 10, but they only had room for 4. So let's start with the first one. And I think this is the most destructive one that we as Black men need to wake up from. And I like to think of them as illusions. So we can use the term stereotype. I like to think of them as illusions, because illusions is something that appears to be real, but really aren't. And so this first stereotype is that Black men are an endangered species. Now, we've had comedians make, a comedy around this idea. We know that when we turn on the television, we're going to see police violence, we're going to see police brutality, we're going to hear race. So we see all those things. But what has happened is, unfortunately, some of our, especially our young Black men, they internalize all that negativity and they come to this conclusion that we are endangered. I've heard brothers that have said, I didn't think I would live to see 30. Why do they have that mindset? Because they bought into the media portrayed images of us and have concluded that we are an endangered species. Now, there's absolutely no evidence to support the idea that we are in any way threatened. But here's how and why I became a writer. In 1995, I was in a restaurant and I overheard a conversation between these 2 apparently well-educated, well-spoken, well-dressed professional Black men. And they were having a conversation about the eradication of Black men from society.
Oh, wait, give me some context, Michael. Were you in the South, the North? Where were you?
I'm in Houston, Texas.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so in their conversation, these brothers were throwing out statistics about how many brothers were, being killed and how many brothers were incarcerated. They had all this information. And so I listened for a moment. I said, well, let me just walk over. So I walked over to their table. I apologized for eavesdropping. And I asked one of the guys, I said, man, please tell me you don't believe what you just said. And the brother looked at me and he said this, absolutely, I believe everything I said. He said, don't you watch the news? He said, I believe in 20 years, all Black men will either be dead or in jail. Now, where did that mindset come from? He had bought into the illusion, the stereotype that Black men are an endangered species. And so as Black men, we have to be willing to challenge our mindsets about how we see ourselves. And that's where it begins, because there's no threat to Black men in general. Now, are there obstacles out there? Of course there are. We're all aware of that. But to have a mindset that all Black men are going to be eradicated from society, that's destructive. And that's the reason I became a writer, because I decided that I wanted to do something to help change the mindset of Black men. So in 1995, I wrote a book called Brothers, Are You Listening? A Success Guide for the 90s. And it was my attempt, once again, to change the mindset of Black men.
So if you can, just give us a couple more so that we can kind of move on, because I want to get into your latest book too.
Okay, so that's one of those.
I know Bill asked for a couple of examples of that.
So another stereotype is that Black men are deadbeat dads. And there's no evidence to support that idea.
Not at all.
Yeah, there's no evidence to support that. Another stereotype is that Black men can't be monogamous. Okay. Another stereotype is that Black men try to be white. Okay, those are just a few of some of the things that we as Black men need to look at, and I bring that up in the book.
Well, you know, I'm glad that
hold on, man. Which ones did Beyonce's mama talk about? What four did she cover? I'm just curious.
She covered the one that in her book, or in her thing, she said that Black men don't cry. And the illusion that I talk about is that Black men are portrayed as angry and violent. So that was one. We can stick a pin in this, but it's interesting because I've heard some people talk about that particular documentary, and it sounds like that she was making the, you know, and I don't want to fully kind of commit to what I'm to the statement because I haven't seen it, but it sounds like she was putting up stereotypes, not as a myth, but as things that were actually conveyed as almost like as a truth. Is that incorrect? Yeah, that's incorrect.
Okay. So okay. I just want to get there.
One of the producers of the documentary I actually had on my podcast. Her name is Nia Wesley. And we had one of the most amazing conversations. You should check it out on my podcast site. And she broke down, you know, how the whole thing came together, who was involved. And she defined it this way. Her documentary was a love letter to Black men. And that's how I saw it. It was absolutely,
I look forward to seeing it.
It was absolutely beautiful.
That's great. All right. So Bill, you want to follow up here or can?
Man, I was gonna say, I just hope she has some Black men involved in it, because you know how, man, we've been getting blasted for other folks' stuff when Black men aren't participating in other conversations. Black men get blasted when we write about stuff that we don't include Black women. So I haven't seen it, Michael. So I'm gonna make it
that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it. All Black men involved, engaged in the writing of it, in the producing of it.
Okay, all right.
Very, very well done.
Great. Okay. We look forward to it. So tell us about your new book, man. Kind of lay it out for us. Give us the big story behind this.
So which new book?
Well, today we want to talk about the conversation with men.
Okay, so a new conversation with men.
Yes.
Actually, not the new book, but the conversation that I've been having for the past 25 years or so. And the intention of the book is to help men recognize that it is my belief that the current paradigm of masculinity is no longer sustainable. The reason that it's no longer sustainable is because if you look at the progress that women have made in this country over the last 30 years, men have no choice but to change and to transform. Because it used to be that women were supposed to stay home barefoot and pregnant, take care of the house. No longer. We now have in this country for the first time, there are more women in the workforce than men. There are also more women graduating from college than men. So all the roles are changing and being flipped. And unfortunately, a lot of men aren't keeping up with these positive changing roles. And so a new conversation with men was my attempt to share some information to support and empower men to recognize that the changing roles are for the better. And we just have to be willing to embrace some of these new changing roles.
So, I mean, so do you think there's a resistance, if we accept this premise, do you think there's a resistance against these new emerging roles? Because I think sometimes what we often forget about is that, you know, it was men who were laboring in factories who paid for their daughters to go to college. You know, it was men who created opportunities for women to emerge in a space of equity and inclusion. I can't believe I just said those DEI words, but so a lot of times I think things are kind of set up like men have been resistant to that. But really, when you start looking at kind of the evolution of women in society, it's, you know, it kind of comes down to moving from an industrial-based society into a knowledge-based society, which really opened up the opportunities there. But also, it was men who, during the industrial age, buying into the American dream of really opening up, of paying for their daughters and sons to go to college. Now, of course, giving women those opportunities, you see what happened. They will exceed, they will excel. So can you just tell me a little bit more about this old paradigm and how that perhaps how that may have perhaps either supported, or it was a form of resistance for how women was able to kind of move forward in society?
Well, so let me answer the question straight on. Yeah, men are resistant to this conversation.
Okay.
Men are definitely, collectively speaking, are pushing back against some of the conversations that I'm having. Why? Because if you look at the current paradigm of masculinity, it's taught us that as men, we have certain roles, certain things that we're supposed to do. Now, we have what I call the 3 Ps. Men were conditioned to believe that we had 3 primary responsibilities, the 3 Ps: procreate, provide, and protect. So what do we as men do? We try to procreate, we try to provide, we try to connect or protect. The problem is, as men, we were never taught how to connect. So what does connect mean? Well, in my book, I talk about one of the first illusions of what it means to be a man. And that first illusion is, to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. Well, it is that illusion that has kept men from actually knowing how to intimately connect. So we talk about, providing and all of the external things, but what we long for as men, whether we will admit it or not, is we long for connection. We hunger for connection, but we don't know how to do it. Why not? Because our culture has conditioned us to believe that we aren't supposed to feel, that feelings are for women. Therefore, there's the connection or the disconnection. There's the wall that we as men put up because we don't want to appear weak. We don't want to talk about vulnerability and sensitivity because the masculine culture says that's not what we're supposed to do. So yes, men are resistant to change, but you've probably heard that all new truths go through 3 stages. First is ridiculed, secondly is violently opposed, and third is accepted as truth. So men may fight it, but you can't deny it. The roles of masculinity are changing and changing for the better. And for the men who are courageous enough to engage in this conversation, their lives will get better.
I want to take a little step back because it's something that as I'm listening to you, I'm listening to how, as you're giving this message in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how did you come to this? How did you come to this? Like, if you don't mind, man, take a couple of minutes and just give us kind of your background in terms of what was your evolution to getting to this point, right? Because I got to think at some point there was some type of a shift in your life that
Sure.
that drew you to draw some of these conclusions.
Okay, so at the age of 23, I was living the American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids and all of that. And by society standards, I was successful. By the age of 29, that American dream had turned into the American nightmare. I went through a divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, depression. I was homeless for 2 years living out of a car. And during the darkest period of my life, I received a miracle. I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. And I was sitting at the edge of my bed, looking across the room at my bookshelf, when I happened to notice that every book on my bookshelf had something to do with getting rich or making money. And as I looked at those books, this question just popped in my head. Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? Now, that simple question, as simplistic as it may sound, literally changed and saved my life in an instant. Something in me shifted. All of a sudden, my depression lifted, and I had this amazing clarity that I was going to be able to rebuild my life, and it was going to become extraordinary. So as a result of that question, I stopped reading books on getting rich and making money. I started reading books on psychology and philosophy and spirituality and metaphysics and personal growth. And I went on this amazing journey of transformation. Well, during that journey, I asked myself another powerful question. What does it mean to be a man? Because I had done everything I thought a man was supposed to do to be happy, and I was absolutely miserable. And that's when that journey began. I started reading books on masculinity, and that was about the time when, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Iron John came out. Iron John came out, and I read that book and I was like, whoa, I get that. I got it. And after reading that book, I read a book by a guy named Sam King called Fire in the Belly. So I really became interested in this whole masculine thing about what it meant to be a man. And so from there, I started doing these workshops and seminars. And again, I went on this amazing journey of transformation, and I was able to rebuild my life. And as a result of rebuilding my life, that's when I started writing, because I simply shared the ways that I was able to rebuild my life after overcoming all of those adversities.
You know, one of the things Ahmad and I talk about a lot, you know, I'm originally from Detroit. Ahmad is originally from San Francisco. And we talk a lot about, you know, our journey as young men and a lot of the things that we went through as his young brothers. I don't know where are you originally from?
Corpus Christi, Texas.
Okay. All right. So I know very little about Corpus Christi. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes.
Corpus Christi. All right. So I know very little about that community, maybe the Black and brown community there. But what I do know is that usually when I talk to men of color, Black men, a lot of our conversations are the same in terms of how we grew up. And it's usually like one or two men in our lives that had an impact. Did you have that? Did you have like one or two men growing up in your life that kind of helped you toward that transformation? And that could be while you're young and while you're older, right?
Yeah. Well, when I was 6 years old, I was separated from my mom.
Okay.
My parents were divorced when I was really young. And so I hadn't met my dad. And when I was 6 years old, I had to go live with it because my oldest sister got really sick. And so my mom took us to live with our dad till my sister recovered. And it was my dad who actually lived with his parents, my grandmother and my grandfather. Well, my grandfather was the guy that laid the foundation for who I am. Because my grandfather and I used to have these amazing conversations when I was just a kid. And he used to call me Big Jaws because I had these big cheeks. And he'd say, Big Jaws, come here. And we'd sit outside. We had a little farm, we had little, those big spools that you see cable wire on that the electric companies use. We had tables and chairs made out of those spools. And we would sit on these spools and we would just talk about stuff, right? And my grandfather would just put this wisdom in me. And lessons that he taught me that I still use today. And he was between the ages of birth and say 14, he was the masculine figure that set the stage for who I am today.
That's good. I mean, because we are, go ahead, Ahmad. Go ahead.
Go for it. Go for it.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So yeah, I want to talk about the kind of these 5 illusions of manhood. But before we get there, there was a piece that you talked about how you felt like men were being resistant. How were men demonstrating resistance, or how are they demonstrating resistance?
Well, first of all, if you as a man start talking about emotions and feelings, men get real skittish. They get real uncomfortable. Because once again, we live in a culture that says men aren't supposed to talk about how they feel. Well, if you're going to talk about feelings, you also have to talk about things like trauma. And men aren't comfortable talking about trauma because as men, what do? When we experience trauma, we suppress, repress, and deny those feelings that come from the trauma. And that sets in motion all sorts of dysfunctional behavior.
Yeah, Michael, let me jump in here. The reason why I bring this up is because, see, I actually think that, sometimes the way these shifts are set up, like men are resistant and they're not doing, because they don't show emotion and they don't do A, versus this evolution of it looking like B. And I absolutely agree with you how evolution and how B should look like and be healthy, but to say that they don't express emotion is kind of a dismissal of their humanity, because I think, when you start looking at men express emotions, but it's not by some of the kind of the defined ways that we have a tendency to lean towards, because men are social human beings. And so when you talk about the lack of connection and all those things, you can't build what's been built without being connected. You cannot build without having some type of fraternal instinct to get things done. And so I guess what I'm saying is that, I definitely am glad that we are evolving as men, and to the things that you've articulated in this book, I absolutely agree with you. But men are emotional beings. They do express themselves. They do show a sense of connection. They have just evolved and need to evolve from where they are to being something better. It's all about the stages of development. I know you're a big believer in the study of human development and just the whole development and the adult development process. And so I just want to that's kind of a place in which I think it's important to acknowledge, because a lot of times we talk about men like they do not have something, when in many ways they may have less of something, or they may have a way of expressing themselves that may not necessarily be embraced or really recognized by a certain person or a certain group who are doing the evaluating of what is considered to be normal.
Well, let me couple of points on that. So first of all, my conversation is 100% in support of men. So
I'm not saying you're not. I guess
what
I'm doing is I'm just kind of making a statement on the back end around who they are versus what we can be, how we can benefit from our evolution and our future, which I 100% agree, especially even with the emotion side of it. But I just wanted to just give some recognition to.
Got it. Got it. But here's the truth. If you get a group of women together and you ask them what's probably the greatest challenge they have in their relationships, women will say 2 things. Number 1, he doesn't know how to communicate. Number 2, he doesn't know how to express his feelings. Now, let me share this quick story. After my divorce, I had a really difficult time with relationships. My relationships had this amazing pattern. They would last about 3 to 4 weeks tops. And then the women would all say the same thing. I care too much about you to stay in this relationship, which made no sense to me. If you care for somebody, why would you be leaving? Well, this is what they would say. You aren't emotionally available. So what was that about? For me, I had to be willing to examine what was it that was keeping me from being emotionally available. Now, what triggered most of that was a bunch of childhood trauma stuff that I hadn't dealt with, okay? So when I say men don't express their emotions, most men, and I'm gonna say most men, don't have the emotional tools to express themselves. And the reason they don't is because of social conditioning. Social conditioning says we're supposed to bottle things up. You remember the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus? Did you ever read that book by any chance?
Of course I do.
Yep.
Of course.
In that book, you remember the part he talked about where men had to go into their caves because that's how they dealt with their stuff? Well, what's that about? Why is it that men have to separate themselves from the people that they say they care about and are in relationship with? Why do they have to go to this cave? Well, because men have been conditioned not to feel. If they were connected to their feelings, they could express them in the moment with that person. They wouldn't have to go to a cave. So this cave mentality, that's part of the cultural conditioning that I'm trying to break up. I'm trying to let men know that you don't have to run into a cave. You just need to be in touch with how you feel, be able to express how you feel, and your relationship will work. Too many times as men, we are so disconnected, we don't even realize we are. I didn't know I was disconnected back when all these women were leaving me. But in doing my inner work, in getting in touch with my feelings, I was able to break that pattern. I was able to become emotionally available. And as a result, I've been blissfully married for the past 20 years. So this conversation is really challenging men to get honest, to get real with themselves, to say, are you really able to express yourself emotionally? And most men, I will assert, can't do that because they don't have the tools.
Bill?
I just wanted to let that sink in for a minute because, we as men, and again, I'll just speak a lot of the context that I've had around the men that I've been around my life. I agree. A lot of men, we just don't know how to communicate. We don't have the training. It's kind of like, Ahmad knows one of my things is financial literacy. I do financial education. And part of it is my conversation is not that people don't know how to handle money. They just haven't been taught properly. They don't know they don't have the tools to handle money. It's not that, because that's another stereotype, right? That Black folk don't know how to handle their money, right? They don't know how to manage their money. I've heard that one. Talk to me about, Michael, some of the workshops and things that you do, because I know that's a large part of what you're doing now is workshops for men. Give us an example of some of the things that you're doing for men to kind of help educate them, if you will, on some of the things that you feel we don't have in terms of tools for our toolbox.
Well, first of all, I want to share an organization that really shaped helped my healing, but also shaped my perception of what it meant to be a man. There's an organization called the Mankind Project, and they have a 3-day weekend called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And the Mankind Project is specifically designed to challenge men to look at how they view masculinity. And
who's behind that?
It's called MKP, the Mankind Project.
But I mean, the people, the men who are behind it.
Well, the original founder was a guy named Bill Kaugh. What was his name? Kaugh, Kaugh, I think. Bill Kaugh.
Okay.
But he was the founder, and this was back in the 70s or something. And they've been around forever. They're in 50 different countries. They do these workshops around the world, these transformational workshops. But that particular workshop, it was a 3-day retreat, if you will, in which what I came to understand as a result of participating in that workshop was I didn't recognize it, but at my core, I honestly didn't trust men.
Mm.
I had some serious issues of trust with men. And so by going through that workshop, I recognized that distrust as a result of being in the workshop. I reestablished that trust, and I was able to connect with men in a whole new way. Now, the Mankind Project, when I did my weekend, there's probably 30 men in the training, and there's probably 20 facilitators and supporters, if you will, in the training. During my training, I was the only Black guy in the whole thing. Only Black guy. And after the training, I had several white guys come up to me and said, you know, man, I'm glad you were here, blah, 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 blah. And they were really heartfelt, connected guys. I mean, it was real authentic stuff. But what I recognized was that as Black men, why aren't we doing things like that? And so what I've done is taken some of the things that Mankind Project teaches and incorporated it into my Shattering Stereotypes workshops. So what I do is I help Black men create a space in which they can come and learn and grow and feel connected and be in a room with men who look like them. Because one of the key elements of transformation is trust. And if you come into an environment and you don't feel trust, then that's not a safe container. You're not going to grow. You're not going to be able to expand, to transform. So what I do is I provide environments in which Black men come together, and there's processes that allow us to connect, talk about things that a lot of times we as Black men don't talk openly about.
Like what? Give me some examples.
I was just about to ask, what are some of the things that that are overlap versus the things that that are more specific to Black men?
Well, a couple of things we don't talk about: fear and sadness. Because what we see in the media, we see the displays of anger and violence. But underneath all anger and violence, if you look deeply enough, is actually sadness and fear. And yet Black men seldom don't have the space to really talk about what's driving that anger. Well, a lot of times it's because they hurt. They've been hurt. There's a guy you guys heard of a guy named Jason Wilson?
Yep.
Yeah, you know Jason Wilson, the brother. He talks about a lot of the stuff that I talk about, but he came up with an acronym for thug that I thought was ingenious. He said a thug is a traumatized human unwilling to grieve. That is so powerful, because obviously society labels us as thugs, but in reality, a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of young brothers, man, they're in a lot of pain.
That's true.
They don't have the outlet to deal with that pain. The only way they know how to deal with it is through violence and anger. So if we can get them to start talking about what's underneath that anger, which is generally sadness and fear, then that anger starts to dissipate, because they get to the cause, what's driving that anger, which is that sadness. And so those are some of the conversations that we don't have.
You know, I'm sitting here, I'm still back on the trust thing, right? Because I think about some of the men in my life who were there for me as I was growing up. And I remember this cat I met who had marched with Martin Luther King Jr., right? That was one of his claim to fame, right? Like I marched with Martin Luther King Jr. And I'll never forget something he told me when I was in my late teens. He said, young brother, he said, the problem with Black men is not white men. He said, the problem with Black men is that we're jealous of each other and we don't trust each other. And see, it didn't hit me until I got in my 20s, when I started to see and look around in the environment that I was in. And you're right, a lot of brothers growing up do not trust each other. They're always looking over, you know, what's this brother's angle, right?
Well, you know, I think a lot of that is based on this idea of how we look at life through the lens of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when you look through the lens of life through scarcity, you know, you have that mentality of I better get mine.
That's
you know,
true.
And that there's no way that I can set myself up to trust that someone else would want to cooperate with me to develop our resource. And so a lot of that, and I know Michael and I, we talked about this before because it's something that's a deeply held belief, and that is shifting that mindset from a scarcity to an abundance mindset. You know, that, you know, Bill and I, you and I talk about this. There's more than enough out there for all of us, right? And actually, it's not even about competition. Really, what it comes down to is your own sense of agency to desire and have the passion to pursue your talents and your future. And a lot of Black men, I think it's a lack of vision for how they see themselves in the future. You know, and so we go into this kind of this scarcity mentality, which is about I'm not trusting anyone in this.
Well, let me get what I can get now.
Right.
Because it might not be any left.
Right. Exactly.
You know, and you know, Michael, let me throw another thing out, man, because you know, I feel like we kind of on a little roll here. You know, one of the things that I've always felt strongly about is the importance of starting with young brothers, right? So that they don't get a lot of this, you call it trauma, right? Try to get them young, man. Try to talk to them young, because, you know, the older we get, the more, you know, and I'll just say it, the more damage we can do to others and to ourselves. That's something that's my own personal belief. As we get older, if we're not careful, we can do a lot of damage to other people and to ourselves. How do you feel about, you know, these conversations with younger brothers, young Black men?
Well, but you've probably heard the quote, it is easier to raise healthy children than to repair broken men.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking to your point, it's important, it's absolutely critical that, especially as a community, that we have to recognize that the most important time in a child's life is birth to 7 years old.
Mm.
Birth to 7 years old lays the foundation for their sense of self.
Mm.
It lays the foundation for who they believe they are. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't change later, but we as a culture and as a community, if we aren't willing to look at how we're raising our kids, nothing is ever going to change. Because the impact of trauma on a child's life is devastating. And what happens is when these young, again, if you think about a gang, what is a gang? A gang is just a surrogate family. A gang is just where someone wants to feel like they belong, they fit in. So everybody that's a member of a gang, I can assure you, the reason they're in the gang is because they don't have the support at home in their family unit. So if we create environments in which they feel like they belong, they feel loved, they feel cared about, there's no need to be in the gang. So what's the solution? We have to create programs that give the young people the tools to deal with the trauma that they're dealing with at home. Now, Ahmad and I have talked about a vision that I have that actually does that, that actually provides a space for young people to heal and to grow and to transform. And that's the only way, in my judgment, that we're really going to change our communities. And that's a whole different conversation.
But talk about it. I mean, that's something, you brought it up, man. Talk about that. I want to hear about that.
Well, again, if you look at trauma, and everything that I'm sharing from my own experience, okay? So okay. I mentioned that I lived with my grandparents from 6 to 13, which was 7 years, okay? What I call my 7 years of hell. During those 7 years, I experienced every imaginable type of abuse a child could experience. sexual, physical, emotional, you name it, I experienced it. I had some deep-rooted trauma that I was completely unaware of until I went through my divorce and started doing this work. So when I talk about trauma, if we don't heal the wounds from that early childhood trauma, it's going to show up in our inability to create great relationships. It's going to show up as addictions. It's going to show up as violence. It's going to show up all the negative stuff. Why? Because if you look at it from an energetic standpoint, emotions are just energy in motion. Okay? A healthy child has the opportunity to feel and express whatever emotion is there. Okay? So what are, and I'm going to ask you men this, what are the 4 primary emotions of all human beings?
Oh, wow, I know I was going to get a quiz tonight.
Yes, four primary emotions.
Hey man, love got to be one of them, Michael. Come on, man.
Here you go.
Love got to be one.
Here you go. It's real simple. Mad, glad, sad, and afraid.
Okay.
Okay. 4 primary emotions. Wait,
where's love fit in there now? Hold on.
Love is the combination of all 4. And that's a whole different conversation, but that's where love is. We think of love as just this positive feeling. Oh, love, but to me, love is a combination of all of it. But anyway, let me just share this. Those 4 primary emotions, mad, glad, sad, and afraid. As children, if we learn how to feel and express those emotions, then we're emotionally healthy. But what happens when you're in an environment where you can't express those emotions properly? Well, once again, you suppress, repress, and deny those emotions. Those emotions, those energies stay trapped in our bodies. Trauma is trapped energy that hasn't been healed. So what we have to be willing to do is give young people, and old people actually, the space to heal that trauma. And I keep putting emphasis on, as men, we're taught not to feel. So what we begin doing at a very early age, we hear things like, big boys don't cry, don't be a punk, don't be a wimp, don't be a sissy. Well, those types of messages condition us to repress and suppress how we feel. We definitely don't want to cry, right? Because we don't want to appear weak. But see, it is that inability to express how we feel that causes most of the damage in our lives. And so if we don't have programs that teach young people how to feel, get in touch with their emotions, and look at the origin of those emotions, then our society doesn't change. Because if you look at violence, what is the cause, the root cause of all violence? The emotion of anger. Every violent act is the result of a feeling of anger in someone.
So would this fit into the category of emotional intelligence, or is it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if you look at it energetically, scientifically, the energy of it, if you have trapped in negative energy in you, you actually lose the ability for rational thought, because that negative energy will overpower the thoughts. So why do people do violent things like walk into a school building and start shooting people? It's irrational, makes no sense. Well, they're driven by the energy of anger. So if we don't give these kids the tools to deal with that anger, it's going to come out somehow.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned tools, because I think, when you start talking about, emotions and being able to express those, that's an essential aspect of it. The other part are those tools, and this level of self-awareness, knowing how you're feeling about your feelings, because that's what we have, mindfulness and meditation and all these things that can be very preemptive around how you begin to see the emotions that are surfacing. And so you become a witness to your own emotions, and that will buy you enough time to move things from the amygdala to the frontal part of the brain, which kind of slows things down a little bit.
Man, Mike, you getting deep now, brother. Amygdala, see, you getting deep now.
Well, the
That's
amygdala is the oldest part of the brain.
Yep,
So.
yep. And let me ask something of you, Michael, because when Ahmad and I started this podcast, and I'm sure you know why we picked the name I Am 5/5, right? I'm sure you know why we use that name. Let me ask you this. Solutions, because that's one of the things, we always said we don't want to be on here talking about problems all day long and complaining, right? We want to talk about what are some things that we can do. So Michael, as I guess as we're kind of going on the other side, right, to wrapping it up, give us some things, man, that we can do as men to work through some of these situations that you're talking about, some of this trauma that we might have. Like what are books we can read? What are places we can go? Like, I know I have my own tools that I've used over the years, but what are some of the things that you would recommend for men that are listening to this podcast right now and might say, hey man, that's me. I'm a little messed up right now. Like I'm that man that you were in your 20s, where I got divorced. I went through all this trauma. I had this childhood trauma that I didn't deal with. What can these men do now to move forward?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand that the three most difficult words for any man to say is, I need help. Simple. As men, we must remove the stigma associated with asking for help. We must understand that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. So gaining the courage to say, I need help is where it all begins. Now, for me, a couple of things. I'm a huge fan of Anthony Robbins, the motivational guy. And he said something that really stuck with me. And I've read this 20 years ago. He said, the key to success is what he calls CANI, C-A-N-I, constant and never-ending improvement. So for me, what that means, especially as Black men, we must make a commitment to our own personal growth and development. That means we must be willing to read books, go to workshops, listen to podcasts like this, turn away from the negative news, right? Invest in our own potential. Now, I did an Anthony Robbins thing, right? I was motivated, I was fired up. I even did the walking on hot coals barefoot, right? But what I came to understand was motivation had never been my problem. My problem was I had some unhealed trauma that I had to be willing to let go of. And how I was able to do that was, first of all, I read a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw. Healing the Shame That Binds You. That book changed and saved my life, because what it taught me was why I was so successful. I was successful because I was so filled with shame. I was trying to meet other people's approval by my success.
Wow, that's deep.
Okay, so if we're willing to look deeply within our own hearts and minds, we start uncovering what drives our behavior. And that takes self-introspection. And so as Black men, that's what we must be willing to do. We must become self-introspective. We must be willing to get in touch with how, as I think back, you remember I was talking from 6 to 13, the violent environment that I was in. So in my formative years as a kid, I cannot tell you one single time in my life that I had any adult ask me how I felt.
Man, okay. Now see, that blows me away right there.
Okay.
That does. Wow.
Never.
But you know what?
Wow.
I wonder how common that is though for our generation.
Well, again, and You know, the media would have you believe like there's a black way and a white way to raise kids. No, it's a right way and a wrong way.
Right.
And the wrong way is to not give your kid an opportunity to express how they feel.
Right.
So in summary, Bill, to answer your question, I said, we as Black men, we must change our focus. And the focus can no longer be out there. And what I mean by that is we can't talk about, we shouldn't focus our attention on racism and all the externals. We need to look internally and say, what do I need to do to become the grandest version of the greatest vision I hold to myself as a human being?
Man, I wish I had a bell right now to go bing, 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 because you know, Bill knows my whole spiel right now. I mean, the things right now that are taking place in our society around race, which is totally about kind of the externalities of what is being done to you. And I just, you know, without sounding callous or dismissive, but I just think that it's just not the front face issue of each individual's challenges inside of a Black community. It is exactly what you stated. And that's why I really think that this conversation is so great, because that's essentially the work, that intrinsic work that needs to be done right now about how can you get connected to your emotions, but also and also being able to imagine a vision for yourself. Because I think so often the lack of imagination about who and what we could be as Black men really limits our capacity to grow. You know, and so a lot of times when we have these conversations, sometimes I think about how much of this is just from the lack of access to resources that can really help bring ourselves into a place of self-evaluation. So I say that because I'm really interested in this ideal of therapy, which is something that seems to finally have kind of got attention in our community. How are you seeing therapy being embraced by Black men in the type of conversations that you're having with Black men?
Well, the good news is if you pay attention to mainstream media in general, there's a huge conversation about mental health. Everybody's talking about mental health, which is great. When it comes to Black men, there are now, from my experience, the people that I'm interviewing and talking to, matter of fact, this Friday, I've got a group coming on my podcast called Black Executive Men. And they're a group of Black therapists. And these guys are therapists for, you know, some of the most affluent Black men in the country. I mean, these are people that are running departments in Google and Apple. And I mean, these guys are with, shall I say, the cream of the crop of Black men in society, if you will. But the conversation is still the same. Black men are looking for ways to deal with their stuff. And now we're starting to talk about our stuff. The fact that we're even having this conversation confirms that there's an opening. Black men are becoming more open. Why? Because I think we're hungry and we're longing for connection. And so this conversation is what's needed. It's not about pointing fingers at a racist society and we all know the systemic racism, all blah, blah, blah. The truth is, as Black men, we have the capacity to be, to do, to have anything we set our minds to. I'm convinced of that. So how can we, Ahmad, I love what you said about vision. Too many times, our young Black men that have bought into the stereotype, the illusion that we're an endangered species, how can they create a vision when they think that they're on the verge of extinction? So we have to start planting some seeds and letting them see what's possible, giving them a vision for themselves that they can create the life that they deserve. That's
you
what I
know,
try to do with my podcast.
you know, man, as I'm sitting here, unless you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you can't see the figurine of Yoda you got in the background, right? And Yoda and baby Yoda from the Mandalorian, right? So I'm officially putting out my Star Wars nerdiness out here. But as I'm looking at that and I'm listening to you, there's some very powerful messages that were relayed from Yoda through Star Wars. And one of them was where he gave, I'm about to get real nerdy now, y'all, so just hold on. But he gave Luke Skywalker his vision.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there was ever a cat that had a traumatic background, your old man killed your mama and they separated you and your twin sister from birth, right? If there was ever a cat that went through some trauma, it was him, right? And we know it's a made up story, but the point is, I looked at that story in that here was a man that was traumatized, and yet he found a community to build him up and support him. And he had a mentor to kind of help him, a few mentors on that journey. I guess the thing I'm saying to you is, you know, one of the things that I felt has been very important in my life has been the mentors that I've had that have helped me on my journey, both financial mentors, mentors, just, you know, and Ahmad knows I feel strongly about there's three men that I feel every man needs to have in his life. You need to have a younger cat that's younger than you, that you mentor, that you provide guidance to. You need a cat your own age that's going through stuff in life at the same time as you, so you all can rap about it. And then you know what the third one is, right? Every man, I think, needs an older cat, somebody that they can go to and say, hey, man, this is what I'm dealing with. Maybe this person is 20 or 30 years older, and they can give them some insights on that. I've always felt those three men are powerful people that every man needs in his life.
Yeah, and to piggyback on the Yoda guy, you familiar with the hero's journey process?
Yes.
Okay, so that hero's journey, when applied to men in general, is the journey that we have to take in order to connect to our authentic selves.
Mm-hmm.
And Yoda said something that really stuck with me. And I remember he said this to Luke Skywalker. He says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. So in essence, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Mm-hmm. If we can grasp that idea and that concept and understand that the hero's journey is a spiritual journey of coming back to your authentic self, that's the journey that we're all on.
Can I tell you something, man? When Ahmad sent me your book, I went right to chapter 9. You know which one that is, spirituality. That's the one I went straight, because when I looked through the outline, I said, all right, let me read, let me see. And because I could see you were on a journey. But the one thing I read in that book, now that I know that book is a little older, the thing that you said was you were going to write a book on your spiritual journey. Have you done that yet?
Came out last October. It's called What If Jesus Were a Coach?
Oh, man, I'm about to look. All right, I'm about to look for that one. Because you said it real clear, man. I could write a whole book on my spiritual journey.
Yeah. You need to check it out, because it's
all right.
It's getting some amazing reviews, because basically it gives you a very powerful, positive approach to religion and spirituality and Christianity. Mm-hmm. It ties science with Christianity. It ties science with spirituality. My belief is that every religion originates from the same source and leads to the same place. That's my philosophy in a nutshell. I call that source divine intelligence. And that's what I connect to.
should we leave it here, gentlemen? I think that's a great way to end this fabulous podcast. And Michael,
yeah, man,
as always, man, I want to thank you for coming on, man, and really having a conversation that was about all of your work. You know, I'm glad that we started off this conversation with you speaking or reflecting on the fact that it's been 20 years of doing this work, and I think that conversation was held tonight or today, wherever you are. And so I want to thank you for engaging us. This was fantastic.
And Michael, hey, let me echo that, man. You know, black man to black man, you know, I really appreciate your transparency, because I know you mentioned some things in there that were very personal. And I want to say, as I listened to you, I did not take that lightly, because I know how hard it is sometimes for us to talk about things, right? Like I had a friend of mine, man, he told me he's at the point in his life, man, you know, he's a single cat in his 50s. And he told me, man, whenever he goes out on a first date with a woman, he just put all his junk on the table. First date, he said, hey, baby, I've been bankrupt. I filed for bankruptcy. I've been divorced 2 times. Like, he just lay it all out. And he's like, look, you want a second date? I just want you to know where I'm coming from. I said, no mess with you then, right? But he said, man, look, I'm going to just put all my on the table. And if they want to come back for date number 2, then it's all good. Michael, how can we find you, brother? What's your website, your Twitter handle? You know, how can brothers find you?
CoachMichaelTaylor.com is my primary speaker's website. But if you just Google Coach Michael Taylor, you'll find
I ain't gonna get nobody in the NFL now, right? I ain't gonna get the offensive coordinator for the Jets, am I?
There you go. No, you do. If you do Coach Michael Taylor, trust me, It populates me. That's why I used that brand, Coach Mike, because there's a gazillion Michael Taylors in the world.
Okay.
But if you put Coach Michael Taylor in front of it, trust me, you'll find it. But if you go there, and also for all the brothers who are watching this, ShatteringBlackMaleStereotypes.com. You got to go to that website, ShatteringBlackMaleStereotypes.com. It is a resource full of transformational work. There's podcasts, there's books, there's courses, there's all sorts of powerful resources that meant to inspire you to be the grandest version of yourself.
Is that also affiliated with your?
I think Bill I think you froze up there, Bill.
You froze up on me, Bill. What'd you say?
Yeah.
I said, is that also affiliated with your practice, or is
that's the platform that I do most things around for black men.
Okay.
I sent you a link to that. So anyway, Dollar Bill, we did it again, man, and getting this brother on here. So I want to thank everyone, our audience out there, for joining us for this fantastic conversation. You could reach us at IAM5/5ths.com. That's all spelled out, IAM5/5ths.com. Peace, my brother.
All right. Thank you, Coach.
All right, guys.
Good night.